I'm just gonna start because I'm just bringing everybody up to speed. This is our third meeting and a quick summary of what we're doing and why, which hopefully will give others a chance to pop in. And Laura, if you don't mind, keep putting the agenda notes into the chat. I'd appreciate that. That'd be great. Thank you. So hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. We have 75 folks that have registered, and if things go as expected, I expect most folks will be here for the session. So we are getting closer. So we started the community of practice, and that's just a general title, to try to deal with use cases around data citation that are still really challenging and impacting a broad number of stakeholders. And the one that was highlighted as one of the highest priority ones to deal with is when you're trying to cite a lot of data sets in a paper. Journals are still very shy on receiving 100+ citations for data. Some will do it, but it's not something they're used to doing, and they struggle with it. And in some cases, we have research that is far more than 100 citations, and keeping those organized and is challenging. We are aware of several efforts to bring together in some sort of packaging, and there's a number of words that are used that are defined, overloaded and defined. So we've chosen to choose a word that's a bit humorous to talk about a collection of DOIs, and the word we've chosen is reliquary. So if you're new to us and you're just now hearing that, I hope it makes you giggle. We have no intention of that word to move forward, but it helps us talk without bringing misunderstandings to the conversation. And we don't quite have a technical definition of it yet, but we are going to see 3 use cases today that are bringing us closer to that technical definition. It will look very likely a mechanism we'll use that's in place already is DataCite's DOI collection, but exactly how we do that and talk about it, it has yet to be solidified, but we're getting closer. We're almost to Jello stage. We're just about to make the Jello. So we met June 8th, no, April 8th. We met April 8th for the first time, bringing all of this to you. Then we had a June 8th meeting, which also went really well and continued to expand on the idea. And then we had a small group work together, primarily the folks willing to talk about their use cases, and there may be other folks willing. So please don't think I'm leaving you out. We're not. We just chose 3 to move forward with to start to firm things up. So those will be our speakers today. So Justin and James are going to talk British oceanography, BO, and they're help me. BO Data Center.
British Oceanographic Data Center.
Thank you. British Oceanographic Data Center. Thank you. And then Martina is going to bring to us the repository that supports the IPCC reports, and how her approach is looking. And then Deb Agarwal is going to talk to us about what Ameriflux is thinking and how we could use this solution for moving forward. So great, we're 4 minutes in, we're at 41, so just about half. That's good. I think we can move forward with half our number. That's perfect. That's a good number. And right, so the idea is we figure out how to have a single package for very many data sets, and you could also have other digital products, either DOI or not DOI. Likely we will create for a DOI environment, rich environment for minimal viable product. So the collection would be a collection of DOIs, but we recognize that that's not good enough, that we have other persistent identifiers that are valuable and potentially URLs that are not persistent identifiers that would be important to include. So if you feel like you have a mishmash, then don't leave. You're still in. and also, it doesn't have to be data. It could also be software or notebooks or other resources to include potentially RRIDs and IGSNs and our other types of sample identifiers. So Deb, did I miss anything?
No, I think you hit it, and the use cases will sort of give people a feel for how broad these use, the things we want to be able to represent are.
So we have an hour and a half, 3 use cases, but we want time for discussion. So if I don't think I ever gave any time limits to our use case descriptors, but if you can take 15, 20, 22 minutes somewhere in there would be perfect. And if it looks like we're really dragging a little bit, I'll say, let's get going along. The slide links to the slides are all in the document. And if anyone loves to type notes, please feel free to join us in the comment notes section of the agenda document. So James and Justin and James, would you like to take control of the screen?
I'll sort the screen.
Yeah,
How's that?
that's good.
Go for it, James.
Okay, so we were approaching it with sort of our issue. So Justin, if you go to the next slide, where as a data center, we receive data from many platforms and we host data in different schema, from different routes, different platforms. So you have a ship, data coming straight off the ship. You have data from instruments off the ship, data from discrete measurements from bottles from these separate casts. You get different streams from different underway instruments and sensors and in situ time series data. So there's a sort of a wide variety of different types of data. And it's at what granule are you able to actually capture and cite this information for reproducibility and transparency, as well as the sort of credit, ensuring the scientists get the credit they deserve. Go to the next slide, Justin. So when users come to download data from BADC collections, they need to be able to cite the data. So they need to actually be able to find the data, get to the data, and then be able to cite this. And the approach that we're taking, if you go to the next slide, Justin, is to give a citation of the version of the data that we receive from the scientists in the format that they provide. So you've got that traceability to what we are getting. When we then get the data, we ingest it into our systems and we reformat it and get it to finer granules. So we might have an entire set of discrete measurements from a cruise, which has 72 different profiles. So of data that go through the water column, and you get measurements at different discrete depths. So you might have over 1,000 measurements from one scientist. And to put a DOI on every single granule would be a bit crazy. So what we do is we have the cruise at roughly the cruise level, we'll put a DOI on it, and of this scientist's data, this collection of data. And there may be another scientist who's measuring something subtly different. So you have the carbonate measurements done by one person, you have the nutrients done by another. And we'll put a DOI on the nutrients as a collection and the carbonate as another collection. So you're getting these DOIs at the point of submission, ideally. And then what we then do, just to click the next, what we then have is these, when we ingest the data at these finer granules, at the moment, they're given numbers that are indexed within our database, and we're giving them, they're sort of like PIDs. And what you can actually do is say that this DOI collection is made up from this series of PIDs. The term accession here is our internal accession. It's a term that where we get the data. and then archive it in our system. And so these numbers that are attributed to these granules are given effectively PIDs. And they're all associated, they can all be associated to a DOI at the point of submission. Justin, if you click next.
And James, as you're flipping forward, I know you just said this out loud, but Rena's question about what exactly is an accession, could you just say it one more time?
An accession is a receipt of data that we then archive.
Okay.
So data that we receive.
Like you just have a term for how you ingest the thing you ingest from.
Yeah.
From the source. Okay. All right. Thanks. Go ahead.
So what you could have is you could have different PIDs being part of different collections of data. So that we have an example here where a PID could be part of another collection. So an area where there's a bit of crossover, someone might resubmit the data twice and it's unclear, or they might create a data product. So what we have is a many-to-many relationship between these DOIs and PIDs. So several DOIs come up to a single PID, different PIs QC different variables to form a single granule. So it's not just a linear relationship or a one-to-many relationship. So we're trying to get that complexity involved there. Just in the next. So as part of the data delivery, someone may come along and collect various download different, because our delivery mechanisms allow people to subset and aggregate different data, and they could come choose whatever data they wanted from wherever in the world, from whatever time, temporal, spatial scale that they want, and get these PIDs together and group them together. Now, if they did that, with this simple example, you have they've collected 3 PIDs that associate to 3 different DOIs. Those DOIs, data delivery requests these 3 DOIs, but be able to actually cite these in a paper, you would have to then go back to these 3 DOIs. If you have thousands and thousands of PIDs, being able to go back to the original citation is going to get a bit messy. So we're wanting a way to be able to actually aggregate these PIDs together, so that when someone comes and gets some data that they've wanted to use, to be able to actually cite those data and have that traceability and transparency of the data that they've received, to be able to cite that. So Justin, the next slide, please. So we also have
a question from Maggie.
Yeah, it might be worth taking some questions if we can answer them rather quickly. Maggie, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thanks. I must say I'm thoroughly confused about you saying DOI and PID, because to me DOIs are a form of PIDs, unless you by DOI means just digital object. Can you clarify?
So the DOI
with the
is datasite DOI. PID is much lighter in terms of metadata.
What?
So effectively, with the DOIs, we're talking about datasite DOIs with the full metadata and the abstracts and temporal coverage and the full metadata you need to create a datasite DOI. With our internal collections, it'd be unsustainable for us to create datasite DOIs for all of the granules. So we're looking at either handles or epic IDs or some other lighter metadata PID to actually handle the internal granules, which then map back to the DOIs for the data that we receive.
Okay, so just note that epic PIDs are handles, etc. So I think it's very important to be as clear as possible with the terminology, but I think I sort of understand what you're saying now. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, did that answer your question as well?
That answers my questions as well, yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
It makes sense to you want less metadata attached to, and it doesn't even exist any more detailed metadata.
But of course, you could have a profile giving a more or less complete set of metadata also to a pure handle. That's up to you to negotiate that with the persistent identification service.
Yeah.
And Mark, did you want to jump in here too?
Yeah, sorry, I'm still lost. So the DOI contains the data set described by the DOI contains many granules, each of which has its own persistent identifier. I would recommend an ARC. And then those granules, are aggregated up into the DOI data set.
So
collection seems bigger to me than accession. That's where I get confused. But accession is bigger than collection.
Well, we had a conversation a moment ago. They used the term data accession for the received.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
So that seems like the smaller piece. You aggregate all the received things into a larger collection, right?
They go into multiple collections. So if you have a research cruise of data, you'll end up with maybe 1,000 granules that go to our samples collection, 100 granules that go to our series collection, 10 granules that go to our gliders or our real-time data flows collection. So effectively what we receive is what the scientist is publishing in a paper normally. So they're creating a data set from a cruise which they're using to publish original research from. We then effectively carve up that accession of data that we receive into elements which go into our various collections, and it normally splits out at least an order of magnitude greater in terms of the number of granules we actually create from their collection as a whole. Because if someone's coming to collect data from BODC, they're interested in the auction data from the North Atlantic, for example, and that will effectively come from numerous accessions we received from scientists over the last 3 or 4 decades. Does that help?
I think I'm beginning to get it. The terminology is confusing me, but I think I get the concepts. Yeah, thanks.
So other folks were getting stuck on collection. So just reiterating that this is BODC's collection internally, not a reliquary.
Yeah, it's effectively the collections we use. We're looking for the right word for them. They're effectively, each one is data product with a type of data in terms of a feature type in the ocean or a feature type of observation almost. And we settled on collection because we couldn't find a better term for it.
And maybe everyone knows why we use the word reliquary for this project, because of these overlapping terminologies. So thank you so much. Please continue.
Yeah, so in addition to a manual user coming to our website, we also broker these data to external portals or services or products. So ICOS, the Carbon Community, or CDataNet, which is a sort of European research infrastructure, and we feed our data into there, and they'll come and harvest the data in a machine interoperable way. So being able to actually identify these PIDs that we have is important. Thematic aggregates. So yeah, it's sort of a series feature type, I think Justin said. So it's important to actually be able to say where these data came from and to be able to allow them to cite and reference these data. So Justin, if you go to the next slide. So this again just highlights the previous slides and how we have different users and this crossover, and you get multiple aggregations of data that people have come and accessed or pulled out or requested, and actually being able to get them to cite the data so that you know exactly what data they used from their subset or subset of data that they've received from us. Then with the aggregate DOI into data services citation, what our solution that we've come up with regarding this is that if you're able to pull all these PIDs and you're able to actually say which ones you obtained and provide them in a citable manner, you could then have effectively a reliquary which contains all the PIDs, all the information that you used in that citable manner, and be able to cite that knowing what you used in that paper that you wrote, the data that you used and reworked or created a product from. So you know where that data has come from and in what sort of state it was in. So that's why we've created, Justin, if you go back a sec, we've also suggested that the code and the methodology, Shelley, you touched on this earlier about code. And so you could actually start building up more of a picture with not just the, these PIDs that we have. You could build up from other DOIs, as we mentioned earlier, are PIDs. So you could build in other DOIs from elsewhere that you've used, if that's the way that they're being served. And code, you could use GitHub, whatever sort of citation they have there, and build it into an aggregated service. And you could have a long sort of a reliquary which contains all this information. I think we have a couple more questions. Oh, we're nearly finished. So if I just finish this, and then we can maybe take the question. Effectively, what we have here is we have a BODC data collection of PIDs that someone has, various people have come in and collected in whatever way. We have the reliquary, which is actually telling you what information they have. So we were proposing you have a minimum amount of metadata to be able to identify or validate the PIDs that have been used and collected. So you have the PID, the name of the PID and the ID description and the URL. Then, and in some of the discussions we had over the course of the last 6 months or so, we were saying that we wanted it to be breakable. So it wasn't just contained, it was that transparency element. We wanted it to be able to be breakable. And there were mandatory fields that we've got here and optional. The mandatory, there may be some other fields, but from a minimum viable product, we could add a couple more, or it could be tweaked and tightened as we go on. And then each PID points to a landing page, points to where you've got the PID from. Includes link to data, link may be brittle if data versions is updated, point to a newer version. And the reproducibility is important in this, and the current focus of transparency is there so that you know where these data have come from. So if you have various different versions from various different organizations, you know which PID you've used and be able to get to the one that was used, really. And one of the issues that we had, this was raised, Maggie, you sort of raised this with sort of DOIs. Why don't you just DOI everything? It's the sort of level of the granules that we're using. DOIs are very metadata rich. And the infrastructure cost as well, DOI versus PID. And just providing that landing page for landing page with all the additional metadata that's there when the information may be held with other linked data that are associated with it. Justin, I don't know if you would. And then we had another sort of use case of high volume image data from cameras where you put a DOI on a deployment, the PIDs on each image, you're going to have millions of images per camera deployment, and annotations on the camera deployment, and additional possible samples of that might be obtained from the instrument that might be attached to the camera deployment as well. So it's reproducible image processing workflows with numerical model data. We also thought of a secondary goal for the metrics. So with this reliquary, you have PIDs, you're able to then go back and using sort of PID graph and PID pattern, be able to actually identify the usage of these data that are then cited. And it's about, you can then try, develop the systems to be able to actually give the credit back to the scientists. You know where the data are being used because you're using these PIDs and you're able to actually identify the relationships and the relationship models that allow you to find what data were used and how they were used, sort of the original submission or where they've come from, and the sort of transparency of that as well.
Thank you. That's fantastic.
Maggie's got a question, I think.
Yeah, Maggie, do you want to go ahead?
Wasn't Mark first, I think.
Mark, was that from before or is that new?
It's just a short question in chat. Is this approach unique to BODC, or are other oceanographic data centers doing this too?
Data centers that produce products. So it's not unique to BODC. It's quite common to data centers and data groups that have to use products that need to reformat their data and ingest it in order to put it out into formats, into products. And on pure FAIR systems where you just put an accession, you just put a DOA on top of that data as it arrives without reformatting it into products. It doesn't apply there, but they can underpin some of the accessions at the beginning. So I think it's a generic generation of products-based approach rather than a pure archiving scientific data approach.
Can you give me an example of another data center doing this?
So if you look at Ebonnet, it's a good example. They do the same thing from European database and CDataNet data. If you look at eFROM's products, or CMEMS is a good example, and they do a lot of Copernicus products.
Okay. Thanks.
Maggie?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, I think you misunderstood me, because I'm not at all advocating that everything should have a data site DOI associated with it. On the contrary, I think DOIs as such are overrated in the context of PIDs. They're really not needed. And I would point out that, for instance, my infrastructure, ICOS, we assign basic handles to most of our data objects, and we provide full landing pages with all the relevant metadata in both human and machine readable form for any data object that we or digital object that we manage, and it's only the final products that we assign data site identifiers to, including collections, by the way.
We agree. I think we want to reserve the data site DOIs for those elements that are cited in the academic literature, because that's where the DOIs are needed. I think having the DOIs at all of the other levels it's not sustainable, and you could be doing other things as a data center, I think.
No, but it's very important that you have identifiers that are unambiguous also for parts, because they are the ones that, for instance, these images that people keep mentioning in the chat from cameras, they are the objects, the detailed objects at this granularity level that are actually being processed in workflows. So it's very important to be able to unambiguously refer to information. So that's why I'm saying that an internal, purely internal identification system that many data repositories are using for, say, raw data objects or intermediate level or intermediate analysis outputs may not be enough to guarantee reproducibility or indeed reuse by any community that is not the designated community and therefore has more knowledge, background knowledge.
I think my takeaway from this talk, and if you could go ahead and let
Sure.
Martina bring up her slides, that would be fantastic. Good time to segue. I think my takeaway here is our minimal viable product has to be more than DOIs, that we have to have handles and arcs, because otherwise we're adding complexity unnecessarily. So I'd be interested if you want to put in the chat, if you think that makes sense, that'd be good. Martina, take us away.
Okay, so we had this rather complex or different use cases, so I will just concentrate on really a very precise use case that we came up in the last IPCC assessment report. To set the scene, the work is connected with what we call the IPCC FAIR guidelines for the 6th assessment report. So that was work carried out by the IPCC data distribution centers, which are jointly managed by currently 4 partners. We have the IPCC working groups, or especially the technical support units, who did a lot of gathering of information, but also take care of some of the parts. And we have a coordination group, which is called IPCC TG Data. The main motivation for the FAIR guidelines was to enhance the traceability or transparency of AR6 and enable the traceability of key results and to have the reproducibility of figures. So it's not a complete reproducibility. That's impossible to get to the source from the source data to the figures, but to have the last bit reproducible. The main data, or one of the most important data, is provided by a research project of the World Climate Research Program called Coupled Model Intercomparison Project, Phase 6, CMIP6. And that is one of the most important input data sets. That's why I mention it here. Just to give a number, we have 140 participants or participating models in this model intercomparison study. So a couple of other numbers are that we have 2,400 DOIs and around 5 million data sets with handle IDs. A second point, which is different from the use case which Justin and James presented, is that we have not a central archive, but the data is disseminated in an Earth system grid, and that means that we have decentral data nodes where the data stays. So maybe that's important to know in the background. Model data is produces lots of different climate parameters in one run, and that's why we cite the data together, which is created in a single model run. Within this model run results, we have the data sets, which are for us time series of climate parameters. We have a subgranularity, which I will not go into here. So any time series of a variable can consist of one or several files. So these files have also handle IDs, but the data sets and what I have in the scheme here is what we have as data access level, and that's why we should stop here with the granularity. If a user uses the data in a model intercomparison, you always need to use data from different ensemble runs and from different models so that you have a statistical representation in your result. So what that means in terms of DOIs and handles is that you select a few handles out of several DOIs and combine it into your study to produce your own results. And typically you might have other input data which you add to it to your study. And in terms of creation of figures, that's the granularity that we look at in the IPCC report. So we want to make the figures reproducible, and that means we want to have the full chain from input data sets, the analyzer script, towards the final data, which is displayed directly in the figure. The idea would be to have a reliquary on the input data sets. The reason to exclude the analyzer script and the final data is that this is created by the authors, and the experience is that this is not ready at the time of the report publication. So I would keep these two out, and the other part is that's a product of the authors, and the input is something which you use for the creation of the figures. And what would enable this is that we could include these data references, these shorthand reliquary reference in the figure caption. At the moment, this is not possible. So the information on the underlying data is in a supplementary material, and outside of the report, we have input data references in the annexes, but not directly connected to the different figures. So that's what I can envision as use case here.
That would be really powerful.
So if we put the report itself into context, then the idea of the IPCC is to assign DOIs for the full report, but also for each chapter. And the idea is to have these linkages between data and report as well. So if you have these DOI on a chapter, then within the chapter, you have all the different figures with the additional information on data usage and this little bit of provenance information with the analysis script and the final data. We are still putting it together, so that's the concept which is behind it. And in terms of credit, that would require that everything which is in this input data reliquary has to be analyzed to assign the credit where the credit has to be assigned. So in case of the CMIP6, we find some handle IDs in the reliquary, and that's the first step if you analyze the content. And the second step is that these handles are part of the CMIP6 input data DOIs, which have authors and which need to be credited. There might be other cases so that in the reliquary, there's directly a DOI with data which can be cited, but there might be a case where you have aggregations with finer input data in the end. If you have a PID in the middle, then you have to assign the credit to the second step. But if it's directly a DOI, then there might be cases where the authors are different, but I would say then you can stop with the first step if you assign the credit. Yeah, that was my straightforward small use case. Are there questions? I can't see the chat, so.
I'm looking through the chat. Maggie and Stian went back and forth, but I don't think it's a question for you, Martina.
I can maybe say something.
Go ahead, Raina. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just like following what you're saying in terms of the inputs to the reliquary. And when I see those handles, I put a comment to this effect, but like you're pulling specific handles into the reliquary rather and not the full DOI. So to me, that kind of implies that the handles are doubling almost as a query PID, if I'm thinking about the recommendations that came from the RDA data citations working group dealing with subsets of data sets. Although these handles might not have the same information as those query PIDs are meant to have, but basically you're having these subsets going into the reliquary, and I'm not sure how you're handling that exactly, but maybe the query PID approach would work there. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know the query PID part, but actually we have two independent systems. So the handles are assigned on really the data sets at the time of data publication. So that's
I'm just wondering how
you cannot split in the end.
I'm just wondering how you represent the fact that you're not pulling the entire data set DOI in the reliquary, or do you basically and represent the whole DOI inside the reliquary?
No, the idea is to really select the data sets which were used by handles. And that would enable that you can do both, that you can assign the credit to this large data collection and that you can specify which data sets within the collection were really used. So in the reliquary, you would only have a very few number of handles. But if you assign credit, you have to follow the two steps via the handle ID to the DOI to which they belong.
Okay, so it kind of bypasses this idea of the query PIDs.
Yeah.
It's a different concept. In the early stages, I discussed a lot with Andy Rauber. And in the end, he said, if you have these small data granules with handles, that's fine. You can build your data collections. We had ideas of data card data collections for specifying which pieces were used. That had a bit of a problem with these private shopping carts to make that all happen. Yeah, this second concept is that DOIs, for us, we have these standalone data publications. So the data is produced prior to any kind of article. So the idea is that these modeling centers who provide these large and quality assured data sets get their credit. And the granularity of production is really a model run. It doesn't make really sense to give credit to every variable within a model run, because it doesn't make sense because it's created at once.
Rena, does that take care of your question for now?
Yeah, it answers my question for now. I'm not sure.
I think there's just options, and Martina shows.
I think that I need to think about that more. I understand the answer though.
Okay, all right, Stian, go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of agree with both of you here. So I don't see it's either or. So you can think of a query as being select everything, and then there's a one-to-one mapping, and then you just have a placeholder in between that can help you saying this is how I used it, and that allows you to describe it locally as well as being a place to solve what we talked about before when things don't resolve as neatly as we want to. But it could also be that it's a kind of unspecified selection, right? Because you haven't said which variable you used, but I selected something, which I'm not going to tell you because it's too complicated, but it came from over there, and then this thing finally ended up in the reliquary. So I think it's very powerful to have that as a general concept, even when there is a one-to-one mapping to the DOI.
Okay, that sounds good. And then Madison is highlighting something that we have talked about previously, but it's worth talking about again. We were thinking about how, who generates a reliquary. Certainly the repository holding the data used by the researcher or the effort, that's what we've been looking at here. But we also envision that capability sits outside a repository, and a researcher can take control of putting together elements from different locations, from different sources.
Actually, that is required for our use case because the data is not centrally stored.
Okay, sorry, yes, because you did have it coming from another source. That's right. But Madison, we've been thinking about what does that mean, for folks that don't have a Martina and don't have a James, and to actually build something that would work. So that's been on our mind as well. Okay, I think And then Oliver, I did see your note about using IPFS. So that might, well, I'll take a look at that. Oh, Mark, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
IPFS may not scale, but I'm still lost. I'm sorry. I missed one meeting and I got way behind. Could you please define reliquary again?
Deb, I'm pretty sure I did a terrible job. Can you do it? I don't think Mark wants to hear my version again. I think he wants to hear your version.
Well, in all honesty, I think what Mark is pointing out is that these use cases have expanded the view of what a reliquary was. I think my original definition was much more simple than these use cases. And so I could repeat my old definition, but I think that it's no longer.
Let's start there. Yeah. I mean, we need a general conceptual understanding, and I don't have it.
So, and it might be helpful for me to present my use case before we sort of jump into that, because it sort of then points out why the original definition was more simple. But, and I'd originally raised my hand, but then I thought, oh, well, it'll be part of the general discussion after this. But one thing that comes to mind from the BODC description and the IPCC description of these use cases is that there's a couple of different goals that we're sort of putting into the reliquary. So one is proper citation of the things that were contributed that created this publication, and where there's too many of them.
So is a reliquary directly tied to a publication?
No, not necessarily.
Okay. It could be tied to many publications.
Right, but
or none.
The driving use case was this fact where publications happen to limit my ability to put in the number of citations that are needed in order to properly cite the things that were used for this publication. Now, I think that what these use cases have added to the definition is also some ability to give clarity to the granularity of the, what the granules were that were used in this element. And I had that sort of as a secondary goal. And what they're bringing forward in these two use cases is that it is not a secondary goal. It's a core part of the goals that we need to have. And the use of the granules, what Martina just brought forward needs to be in a part of the countability part of it, so that you're not just counting the huge accession in James's terms, or submission, or thing that was given to you by the data authors, but maybe the component of it that was used within that. So I've been trying to, with these two use cases and thinking about mine, which you haven't yet heard, trying to think of how can we rethink the reliquary to sort of expand to fit these use cases without getting too complex. And I almost have in my mind this thing where there's the citation, the direct citation element in the reliquary, and then there's the other, provenance information and reusability information that may or may not be all part of that, or sort of as a separate section in there. But I think we want to save some of that discussion for the later part. But the initial definition of the reliquary was something that would enable you to get primary citation to a set of elements as being not secondary contributors, not, it was cited by a paper that I cited, but where it was, these would have been cited, as the primary thing. Instead, I'm citing the reliquary that holds all those primary citations.
Okay, so it's a citable body of data that may contain data from many sources and many providers.
And where we're not assuming that it has to all be data, that it could be other
Citable
things
body
in
of
there.
information. Yeah. All right.
Yes.
So it's a
where that thing, where
it's a
that
bundle
thing
that we can point to that has all the stuff that was used.
such that those get counted as primary citations. So not just a funnel that points to the stuff that was used, but such that all citation counting mechanisms, or at least the primary ones,
worked into the scholarly publishing,
recognize those as actual citations by the bodies of work that cited the reliquary.
Okay, I think I get it.
And Caroline, you've got a thought.
I do, just to add either some clarity or some opacity to this conversation. Going back like 3 meetings, like where we originally came up with the word reliquary, it's the classic definition of a cabinet of curiosities. So it's both the credit piece, giving credit to everything and everyone in when you open the box, if you will, but also the customizability piece. Who's maintaining that cabinet? Who puts things in? Who can take things out? How do the things in there, are they changeable? Are they fixed? Are they mutable? So I would recommend a smaller working group to really hone in on a definition of all of those factors so that we, when we go forward, everybody knows exactly what we're talking about. But I think they have to have both those aspects, both the credit and the sort of the maintenance, who's wrenching under the hood, if you will. And yeah, I think we're getting close to that definition. We've kept it broad. We've kept it a little fluid because we wanted to have these discussions in the interim to kind of figure out what we're talking about. And now that we're honing in on that, I think we can actually establish a definition of what is a reliquary for our purposes. I hope that helped.
Yeah, it did. And I think we might have multiple definitions. I think we might be assuming a solution before we've gotten through the use cases. This cabinet of curiosities concept.
I mean, I hate to say the classic, it depends, but it kind of depends. It depends on the needs of the researcher who is opening the cabinet. It depends on the quality and status of the items in the cabinet. And again, are they fixed? Are they mutable? Are they changeable? Who's responsible for the stuff inside there? And also always going back to the credit. So I think we need to, like I said, maybe have a subcommittee. Subcommittee. I didn't want to say that word. A smaller group, tackle this in pieces, really break it apart and really examine what information does this group need to move forward with a working definition, bring that working definition back to the larger group and have people tear it apart. And then hopefully we'll have something, we can close the lid, lock it, and we're good.
Thanks, Caroline. All right, Deb, let's see your use case.
Okay. Yeah, and so when I was thinking about this thing, part of why we use the word reliquary is because there wasn't an assumption that an existing solution didn't work. It's just, it wasn't clear that any of the solutions were the best answer today. And so we needed a different word to sort of be agnostic to whether any of those solutions worked. And so that was part of the definition of reliquary, is just to sort of make it a thing that we define and then figure out what the solution is. Okay, so my use case, let me get the share going. So what drove this for me is, and I didn't call it Ameriflux because I kind of want to broaden the context. I've been working in the context of very large scale collaborative earth science projects. So I'm sort of one level below the IPCC example in that I'm part of groups that contribute data that has gone into IPCC, but to many other things. And they're very large collections of things that are going into this space. So just to give you a feel for some of these, just to give you some size. So the Ameriflux network is well over 500 contributing sites. Now, what is a contributing site? Each individual site is an independent research team who has put a tower up in a particular ecosystem and has 4, 5, 10, 20 people who are all helping to gather that data, and they've been doing it for 20, 25 years, some shorter, some more, right? So that was my first driving use case, is people couldn't cite 500 citations and it was causing great problems. But some other use cases that I have, I'm working on projects where we have very large teams of 70 to 100 people working on a particular problem. So one of those is in watershed science, one of those is in the tropics. Those teams are in little subgroups that are gathering data and publishing that data. And so they're ending up with 80, 100, 200 data packages a year that are generated by a subset of that team and have, in our case, a unique DOI on that data. So, this then is a visual view of that use case. And so any one user might have used 210 data sets from Ameriflux, which are individual sites. They might have used 70 data sets from the watershed space and maybe one data set from USGS. And so now I'm thinking about how the heck do they do those citations? Today, they're doing them in the supplementary materials. It's causing a great deal of problems within the collaborations because they're not getting proper citation and they're not countable. So that was a driver. I do have the use case that's similar to the ones that you just heard, in that often it's sub elements of those data sets that in fact they're using. So they might have actually run a query to get only some subset of the number of years or some subset of the number of locations. So the point of this idea is also that in my case, in both the other cases, you had one very large scale entity that could potentially create that reliquary and bring all those elements together. In my case, I have multiple smaller things that would each have to implement something to make this work if we were to have that it's always the place where the data is housed. So the thing we'd have to recognize, if the repository itself always has to do it, then you're asking each repository, even these medium scale repositories, to add a massive amount of work to the system. And so that's part of this use case, is pointing out that this data is coming from many different repositories, each one having a fairly large set of DOI data or other PID data that is coming into the system. And they each have different requirements about what is the proper, about the licensing of these, though typically they have a requirement of citation or of acknowledgement. So that's sort of the point there. We do have these filters. I'm not against having the granule sort of structure and things, but I wasn't assuming we were going to try and do that at first. I was instead assuming that we would actually, in our case, I was imagining that I would actually have the DOIs in the reliquary and then supplementary information inside the reliquary that provided the filters and other reuse information as a separate segment, or as annotation on those citations in the reliquary. That one of those two would be an option as to a way to do this. But in putting this together, I realized we also have to think about there are some sources that require an acknowledgement as well, and that we ought to think about that is a piece of the reliquary use case, because in our case, the acknowledgements are also getting too large, and people are having to create really crazy abbreviations to put all the acknowledgements in that we're supposed to do. Because in our case, Department of Energy requires acknowledgement when of the funding when we use that data. So some other characteristics. Each user is applying different filters. We don't control those filters at all. And including that they might just want a list of sites, but and that how many repositories are actually providing this very large set of citations, in our case, is more than one, and it could be many. And so that I think is another key element that sort of adds to the use cases. So I'm gonna end there. I wanted to keep it pretty simple since I knew that you'd already see the much more complex views. But even this simple use case is quite difficult today. And right now, it's causing that we don't get the citations for the contributors. The other key piece of this that everybody's got to remember is that the incentive for the contributors to provide the data to these collections goes down tremendously if we can't figure out how we cite them down to those original accessions or submissions or contributions, so that people can actually get the credit for that data. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to discussion.
Thanks, Deb. Talk about being short. And so Mark is in his mind building the requirements for the thing. So that's happening in the chat. And yes, I see that as next steps to flesh that out. And Caroline is recruited in for the small group. Brilliant, Caroline. Thank you.
So I guess I want to say something that's sort of come to mind to me. If we think about it as there should be one goal of the reliquary is the proper citations and counting of those citations. And I think there the only question becomes, is it the citation of the original submission of data or accession of data? Or does it have to always be the sub-element of that data, right? Does it have to enable that? And I think Martina made a good case for that it does have to enable that you could identify the sub-elements in that citation credit element part of the reliquary. And I think of sort of the other element of the reliquary, which could be, I'm not making an assumption of exactly how this gets implemented, but that there's an element of the reliquary that's all about the traceability aspect and the information about some of these graphs or other things that enable you to really dig in through this and understand. Or in my case it might be the queries. What did I use to exclude parts of this repository? Or so it could be a query, it could be a filter, it could be sort of the collect these in James and Justin's terminology, the collections, different pieces of it like that. I guess that's what's starting to sort of form in my head is some of how we think about these reliquaries, so that we don't convolve those two aspects too much. Because I kind of want to think about the credit and I want to think about the traceability as two separate elements of this, and how in the implementation they have to be is defined by how we want to use these things.
So Bruce just got nominated to talk.
I think Deb was hitting on a point that I've struggled with, which is that tension between citation for credit and citation for reproducibility, and where that fits into the context. Because if I'm talking about citation for credit, I don't care whether somebody has used the form of the data that's in a cloud optimized GeoTIFF or in a net CDF. But if I care about the citation for reproducibility, I probably do care about that distinction. And I'm not sure where that plays in the concept here. That tension is hard.
All right, Justin.
So, wrap my head around this a few times. When we're looking at the credit and citation, it's effectively when an organization supplies data to us and that data gets picked up and that gets used by other groups, it almost becomes part of their academic record. So, but the entire problem is by building a reliquary, what we're doing is we're building, as Mark's been saying in the chat, we're building that graph. And that graph goes from that original data through to the usage of that data. And we discussed reproducibility versus transparency a couple of times. And as our first kind of minimum viable product for this group, we settled on focusing on transparency to start with. So we've still got, hence in the ability use case, you've still got that brittleness there. Because we want something that's achievable in kind of the reasonably near term. If you're going for reproducibility, there's a lot more infrastructure needed. It's a harder problem to solve. But the transparency comes from tackling it from the citation through to the sources. The credit comes from taking it from the sources through to the transparency. So fundamentally, it's the same problem, but you're looking at it in different directions. I think one will need to take precedent over the other. I'm not sure which way that goes around. But this is the same problem. We're just looking at it in different ways and different directions. That's the way I see it. Don't know if that makes sense.
Martin?
Yeah, I haven't caught up with the two comments that were just made, but I think I totally agree with Bruce and I guess Justin that, and we talked about this in the previous meeting, that credit and transparency go in very different directions, and you cannot have both in an easy way, and there has to be sort of a focus on one or the other. So for example, Martina's use case has both elements, but you have to do different things to address one or the other if you want to publish a paper that cites the data and wants to give credit to the researchers that have done the work to generate the data, or in her case maybe do the modeling. That's very different, really trace of what kind of work was included. And because today we are sort of going full front on concepts and throwing everything in one bucket and stirring it, maybe that's one of several places where we can sort out the different drivers of why we're doing something in the first place. And they're both good, and they're both also very old and well known, but it's really hard to do things as broad as possible to give somebody credit because he or she was somehow involved, and being very specific about what was really needed to generate the data that you need to for the transparency and maybe reproducibility. And that's, for example, for many years reflected in the data citation principles, where you have them spelled out separately. Interestingly, the credit goes before the transparency.
And Mark has a really good point. There are other ways to achieve some of these goals other than through direct citation in a paper. And this is one of the things he's been working on for a very long time. And it may be that in the end we have a couple different ways of achieving what we're looking for, but this idea of bringing together what goes into an effort, this could be represented in a paper, it could be, or perhaps Deb and I were talking earlier about the fact that maybe your funder is interested in a package of what you've generated from a grant, and you could create a reliquary for them. Here you go. This is everything. And it's, it's different than a CV, right? It's a bunch of products. So it's a different concept. But yeah, all right. So I think the pot's boiling. I think it's time to make the tea. And some folks want to spill the tea, but we won't spill the tea yet. We have 2 events coming up that are helping us move the ball along. One of them is actually next week on November 3rd. We've got a Earth, Space, and Environmental Science IG that will have this topic come out as a breakout session. And I'm assuming that you're all forward motion. And what we'll do there is whoever comes, we'll bring them up to speed. We'll walk them through the last, from April, and frankly from December, because Caroline and running the town hall last December, we're almost a year old, Caroline. And then introduce a concept for a working group. And the reason for a working group is we really do want broad awareness and endorsement. And it's not that we're going to say that one thing is possible. We want the concept to be possible, but we want to try to stay away from things like VHS and Betamax, right? We really want something that's more, well, the beauty of, we all love the high quality of Betamax. So maybe that's the difference between transparency and credit. I don't know. I don't mean to overload analogies. So we really want to try to get everybody on one format or one flexible format, such that it's clear to publishers what to do. It's clear to institutions how to acknowledge these products through their promotion and tenure. We know we need the indexers to help us here. So I know, I think we have at least one on. I see you, Megan. So Megan's been really helpful. And, hopefully we'll have a conversation with others for the same type of capability. Haven't done that yet. So that's RDA next week. And then Deb has a e-lightning at AGU, where hopefully we will have jelloed enough. And that's our next step. We'll have to meet as a small group, as Caroline has recommended, to start to actually, I think Mark had some really great, the graph, you could envision this graph with nodes and edges, and what does that look like exactly? And what would we love to have in, which use case does it address, and what would actually be a great minimal viable product.
Shelley, could I just jump in for just a second? Sure. The purpose, just to add a little context and a framework around the small group, the working group for the definition. The goal is to have something defined, but not prescriptive. Defined enough so that we all come back with a clear concept of what a reliquary is, what the purpose, the function, how it can move forward, but not so rigid so that people feel constrained. We want some flexibility built in, and enough flexibility so that it will be broadly accepted. What that enough is remains to be seen.
Yep. No, I completely agree. We like a framework, and then different disciplines might have a slightly different, look and feel, but the general gist should be similar. So it's implementable broadly. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay. Let's see. Just some thinking out loud with Caroline and Deb and Chris. So I'm thinking that the actual mechanism, like what does it physically look like when we create one of these? Is that our next step? And what the boundaries are? I'm thinking, I think we have enough examples. Is ComSys on by chance? Michael, are you here? Or one of Michael's folks?
Michael's not here, but I am.
Laura, were these examples, do they fit in your paradigm?
Yeah, I think so. It's the same sort of thing. You have data and models, and then you have data produced by models, and then we have to find a way to group that all together. But for us, citation for credit is actually really important. And so that's sort of been our focus. How do we connect all these different things, the data, the model, and the output of the model, to some sort of citation that can be used in papers? Because, you know, in academics, citation is everything. So we're trying to link all this so that we can give the credit where the credit is deserved, and then those people can use that credit to advance, right? So that's where we're at. So yeah, definitely very, very interesting.
Okay. And for you guys, you can just cite your model, and then the question is when there's a lot of data sets involved.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, so you're in good shape.
Good. Thank you.
So Shelley, it seems like one thought would be I'm actually wondering whether the three of us use cases could somehow try to just put together just even a document with all the, an example of the information they'd like to be able to represent.
Yeah.
In a reliquary, right? Because we've given graphs, we've given sort of hand waving about the granules and the PIDs and the various pieces. And if we could even just try to just think, if I was just going to stick this all in a Word document, what would the information be that I would put in there, and how would I organize it? Because then if we could also then identify at what level would we expect the credit to sort of be counted of that, it feels like if the three of us did that would also give people a more concrete object to sort of think about what are the possible implementations. Because right now we've given too many possibilities and too many parts.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And then you could even have a Google Doc and have folks go through, will this meet your criteria? Yeah, Caroline's nodding. Okay, I'm glad to see Caroline nodding. Will this meet your criteria? Will this? Okay, I really like that. Justin, you had your hand up.
Oh, I was just going to mention, I added it to the working doc today. We need a requirements list.
Yeah.
So
yeah, this could lead to that. So yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, good for that. I think it's a really healthy step to, now we've had all the discussion, going back and looking at what we really need and focus it a bit more.
Yep, I agree. Is there anyone else who would really like to do this exercise by creating something for yourselves that you want to join the three? It's not limited. You're welcome to do this. If you feel like you're not going to be represented in those three, we don't want you off the island. Frankly, we want to, keep you on the island. Oh, I'm not looking at enough. Okay.
Yeah, honestly, the more variety, the better, because that's how we're going to reach requirements that hit that 90%, level of hitting the use cases to a reasonable enough version that it is adoptable.
Okay.
So we were going to, we have a project that Stian and I have started now for COVID data. And we actually have in that a written in task to do this.
Okay.
To actually apply our RO-Crate approach to doing kind of the mass credit use case that Deb was presenting.
Great.
So so we will be developing a use case around that and kicking the tires in a sort of proof of concept that will feed into your user requirements, because sometimes user requirements, if they're just in the abstract, sometimes you need some more, like, we tried out something, this didn't quite work, to feed into the requirements.
Well, and I'm hopeful that it would work. So yes, okay. So Carol, you're on the island. Bring Stian.
Well, we wrote it in as a deliverable to the European Commission. So that's one way of
Carol,
making it.
you just brought up something brilliant that I want to echo, and that's it didn't quite work. We need failures. We need examples of, we got so far and here's where it fell off the cliff. So we know to steer, if this is not a success only venture. So I think absolutely that has to be part of the discussion.
Yeah, we need to kick the tires, Caroline. Yeah.
Tire kicking. I'm also very happy to see Alicia's identification of e-notebooks. I really feel like e-notebooks has to have a home. And Chris and I have we have a simple answer to notebooks, but I don't think it's going to hold for much longer because you can bring in all of these other products, and it's a very one-dimensional answer. So yes, I would be appreciative of someone helping think about notebooks and what goes into notebooks. Okay, this is exciting. So team, do we want to try to do this before AGU or after AGU? After. Okay, I see, I'm looking at your faces. Everyone is like, oh my goodness, do you realize AGU is only in X number of weeks?
US Thanksgiving, my mother's birthday, all of it. And plus, I think we're going to pick up a lot of really good intel at the fall meeting.
Yeah.
So we will be there with our pads and pencils and taking it all in.
Is there a formal way, Caroline, of kind of getting the community to sort of contribute requirements? Because as I said, we need a user requirements, a requirement list. So is there a process that you might be going through to do that?
Well, this is our RDA group. So this is where we'll get formal and follow the RDA process and actually build them out and have a recommendation. Yeah. And we actually have it set up. I just haven't told you what the link is to join. So mostly because I accidentally set it up and it wasn't fully typed in yet. So it looks really hokey.
That's kind of how this group formed, right?
I don't know. I thought we had more sticks to rub together, but yeah, but this is a little dodgy. It's I'm not proud of it. So yeah, we'll get an approved working group and we'll actually have meetings and people can join and we'll have things that get reviewed. Is that okay, Carol? Is that works okay? And is RDA the only group that we need to do? I mean, my intention was to actually float this across ESIP as well.
So I don't really mind as long as there's a group that
Okay.
it's that I know it's obvious where we're gathering these requirements. Somebody said requirements were absolutely essential, and I think this is absolutely true. And you gather requirements in different ways, don't you? And you gather requirements by building things and saying that's not what I meant.
Yeah, no, it's
another way of building requirements.
I completely agree.
The only other group I can think of is the AGU informatics folks, SC. So
well, we have access to their email list and can invite them to join the RDA group. So that absolutely would be okay too. And the group, the IG that is hosting us at RDA is the ESIP RDA Earth and Space Science IG. So we do pull in ESIP that direction as well. Oh, I'm not reading the chat. Okay, hang on, reading the chat real quick.
Yeah, Bruce is suggesting GitHub as a collaborative platform.
Yep, we can do that.
Absolutely.
We can do that.
Yeah.
This Chris has these workshops on GitHub already, so we could do that. Yep, don't mind that at all. Yep.
I mean, there's a usability barrier, but I do like the whole pull request mechanism to track contributions and see how things evolved. I first saw that with what NIST did with 863 and the development of that policy, and I thought that was just an absolute showcase for how to do something like that in the public venue.
Yep. We'll like you said, there is a barrier, so I think we'll just check and make sure everyone's good with it. I don't mind a Google Doc for early stuff, but when we start having like managed tools, we have to track it much more closely. So there may be a moment where we go from one to the other.
It's what we did in the carpentries. You know, we started off in Google Docs and then moved things over to GitHub where you could track and in the open. Yeah.
We did the same in our trade. We started in a Google Doc so you can mess about with comments and so on, but then once you start locking it down, you have to formalize a bit better. But if you already got the GitHub org signed off, at least you have everyone's contact details gathered in that place.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And Raina's got a really good point. We have a we need to stay very close with data granularity because what we're doing will inform them and vice versa. And Raina, I'm sorry, your monthly meetings fall on a meeting I already have scheduled, which is why I've been having trouble getting. All right, we got 5 more minutes.
Maggie's got her hand up.
And Justin does too. Justin, is that old or new?
It's new.
New. Go ahead, Justin.
Sure. At AGU, we've got 3 opportunities to get different feedback. We've got the ELI, we've got the poster. We've got one in the data repositories best practices session, which means we can get feedback from data repositories and gather feedback there. And I think we've got one in the half-day innovation as well, so we could actually target the different AGU bits at targeting specific things for different communities. I think that's next meeting's goal though. And then for the Ocean Sciences meeting, which you mentioned at the beginning, we could potentially get the science users citation requirements back out of them. So I think over the next 4 months, we've actually got most of the opportunities we need to actually hit those communities via the 2 AGU meetings.
Okay. Yes. Great. I will. I'll add those other ones to the notes. I'll admit that I was a little sloppy on prepping our agenda, so I didn't think of all the other ones. So thank you for that. And Maggie, go ahead.
Yeah, just a few points. First of all, regarding the platform to collaborate on. So this is now, as I see it, a very North America, Europe-centered group, and of course for good reasons, having started with AGU related issues. But be careful if you want the rest of the world to be able to participate actively. Some countries are of course blocking certain services, etc. So it becomes much more tricky for, say, Chinese people or people based in China to interact. That's just one comment. Then just regarding other RDA groups to collaborate with, I would strongly suggest that we also bring in what used to be called the Data Fabric Interest Group, which is now going to be changing name to Fair Digital Object something interest group, as well as the Fair Digital Object Forum initiative, which I think is also, all of these things are so intimately tied also in terms to how do you set up machine actionable workflows on objects, etc. So I think there could be really good collaborations there as well.
Yep. And of course, happy to have Mark here because he represents also data citations at RDA. And not wanting to, we're sticking to our use case, right? We're not going outside the lines. Although I'll admit, sometimes I think our lines are a little waffly as we realize what we have to solve. Yes, Google Docs in China is a bad deal. Okay, and timing. Yeah, a number of folks from Australia are not happy with me, but having picked this time. But so we'll change. So when we move over onto an RDA platform, then we can move times and keep going with recordings and keep everybody up to date. Great. Thanks, everyone. I think we're at the bottom of our time, and huge thanks to our presenters, everyone for their really great ideas. Your general support, even though we're not there yet, your general support that this is a valuable thing to do. Thank you. Yes, alternate times. Yes, we could do that. We do that with other things. We could. And I think we're mature enough that it's time. It's time. We have what are we now, a teenager? We've made it to teenage years in project time.
Hey, I was on at 3:30 in the morning with IAC in Dubai. So it can be done.
Yes. Yes, and Liz from DataCite, thanks for being here since our friend Martin had to take a hat off. So Liz, do you have any questions? We need you like totally spun up. Do you need anything from us?
Not specifically. I've just been listening to the use cases and thinking about what the parallels are to things we already see in DataCite and the capabilities we have in the DataCite schema to support the different kinds of relationships that you're talking about, which fortunately we do have the capability to support relationships between types of identifiers that are not DOIs, like handles and arcs and other identifiers.
Yep. And there was some general early talk with Matt and Martin. I'm weirdly going to leave you out of this conversation. I'm sorry, but I'm having this like feeling. But everything's fine. Everything's fine. Matt's great. Liz is great. Everything's fine. I'm okay. I'm really fine.
Martin, your expertise is still valuable in this.
But Matt had actually said that, and to Mark's point earlier, there's more ways to solve problems, and the actual issue you're solving may not be the way you're describing it. So how to do credit and how to recognize these, children of a parent larger object, the contents of the reliquary, right, Caroline, the curiosities, which I just love, and that there might be a different way for us to actually see the activity that creates credit happen on the other side. And also, thank you to indexers for helping that as well. Megan's here for that. But it's not one answer. It's all the answers, because it's all the domains. It's all the. So great, Liz. So yes, I'm glad you're here. Did you get an email? How did you were you on our email list? Are you there? Do I need to add you?
I don't remember exactly whose link I signed up through. It might have been from Alicia. But I was on the email list previously, so.
Okay, all right, then, okay, all right, good. So if you signed in, I'll make sure to always include you going forward. So, okay, thanks, Mark, bye. Great.
Oh, Liz, you got it in our Slack chat. I know where you got it then.
Yeah, okay.
Our data citation Slack chat, yeah.
Yes, yep.
Great. I'm just hanging on if anybody has anything they want to talk about, because I don't have an immediate meeting, so folks can hop off if they're done. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
you. Yeah, so we just need to schedule. We could have a very small group meeting before AGU, like 5 people or something, just to kind of set dates and agendas going forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're running, at least I'm running headlong into some commitments. So
yeah, I have generally I'm fairly solid through Oceans, which is in February, and completely out in January for personal time. So I would value a something either right before or right after. Yeah, it would be really good. So yeah.
Okay.
All right. Take care, everybody. I'll go ahead and
refill. See you guys later. Thanks again.
Carol, thanks for being here.
That's all right. No, thank you. I'm just a bit tired today. It's been a very intense week. But Stian was on holiday, actually in a holiday cottage, but he came in anyway because he's so committed to this with his kids all running around him. But he was still engaging. So because this is the only meeting he came to, right? So that tells you he's committed.
You know it's good.
Yeah, you know that you've done something right.
Yes. Soul fulfilling.
Yes.
Him. Okay. All right.
Yeah, we all need
really, really good.
Seriously, get a life.
And we can justify that because we wrote it into one of our projects. So we're going to do this anyway, whatever happens. So we're doing it with you guys. And I've been talking to Chris as well about let's go do some piloting.
Great. All right.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.
See you. Bye.
Cheers.